Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Dave Lee. I'm a technology columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, and this is a live stream to discuss the first year of Twitter under the control of Elon Musk. Of course, it's now called X, which is one of the big changes. Discussing this with me, we've got a great couple of people to do this. I can't think of anyone better, really. We have Zoe Schiffer, who's the managing editor of Platformer, a fantastic newsletter about platforms, social networks, and Twitter has been a huge focus for her and her colleague Casey Newton. And also Matt Navarra, who is a social media consultant who I've known for many years, and throughout that time has been logging every meticulous detail about the social networks that companies like to use to see what changes are being made and how that affects them. So we're going to get a really good sense here of what's changed on that website over the past year. Zoe, thanks for joining. I want to start because yesterday there was an all hands meeting at X, and it was the first one since it's been called X, and it's the first one we think since Linda Yaccarino was placed in as CEO. What do we know about that meeting? How did it go down? What was the feeling in the room?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing that we've been seeing for a while, actually, since the takeover, where there's kind of two versions of reality. If you read the news, you kind of get this feeling that Twitter, now called X, is completely in chaos. Employees are quite unhappy. Advertisers are fleeing. They're not coming back. And the business is really in crisis. But when you listen to the all hands meeting, Elon and Linda Yaccarino are painting a pretty rosy picture of the company. They asked employees ahead of time to submit questions. They didn't answer those questions. And instead, they shared these business updates that really were about growth, about the product roadmap. They want to build a LinkedIn competitor. They want to go all in on payments. I believe Elon said he'd be pretty surprised if they didn't have like a full banking platform within a year. At one point, he announces integrating like X's video products right onto TVs, which I think was news to Linda Yaccarino, and she seemed a little bit surprised in the meeting. But we really did get a different version of reality than what you and I are often reading online.
Yes, it seems like, looking at how particularly Linda Yaccarino frames her job at the company is to sort of treat it, isn't it, as if it's the potential's enormous. And even though the core product doesn't seem in a great place right now, they're seeing all these opportunities to compete in different areas. Do you think it's likely? I mean, you've been following this very closely. I mean, do you think it's likely they can turn things around to the extent which they can actually not just save Twitter, but create this much bigger, powerful company?
To me, it seems quite unlikely right now. They continue to act like everything is fine, and yet the data directly contradicts the updates that they are sharing. That said, it's hard to bet against the richest man in the world when he does have a significant war chest if he wants to continue pouring money into Twitter, now X, to do that. That said, I think what we've seen is that he's a bit resistant to pouring more of his fortune into the company that he already felt like he overpaid for. And so I think we're still waiting to see, is he going to get bored and move on, or is he going to continue investing time, energy, and possibly money in trying to turn this sinking ship around?
I think getting bored does seem like an interesting thing that could happen. I suggest we call it Twitter from here on in, just because it's easier to say, and I think it's one that we mostly recognise. Matt, thanks for coming on. I'm keen if we sort of go back to the beginning of of Elon's year at Twitter. He obviously came into the building with the whole "let that sink in" joke that he did, and that really set the tone. I mean, how would you sum up the past year? What's changed about Twitter in your mind?
Yeah, it's hard to know where to start, isn't it? There's so much that's gone on in such a short space of time. But I think the words that come to mind in the last year has been chaotic, very damaging for the platform and for the world at large. I think in terms of what that platform has been able to do for people around the world in terms of as a communications platform, it's been clearly very expensive and continues to be very expensive for him. But I think, there's been several changes that the platform has had made to it by Elon that have been significant to where we are today. I think it started off, well, it wasn't necessarily the first thing, but one of the early things was the furore around the verification. Some might say it was vindicated because other platforms have now copied this kind of model of charging for verification. But in terms of the execution and implementation of verification and the risk it created immediately for brands hands when they first started thinking this is going to be a difficult year. It was exampled by just the fact that those changes were rushed in seemingly without much thought, and caused all sorts of issues. On top of that, we had changes to policy in terms of, this idea that people should be able to say more of what they want when they want. And it's kind of like this free speech pitch that he'd always made from the beginning. But then you couple that with things like bringing back some of the worst actors on the platform in terms of, harassment and bullying and doxing people and all sorts of bad behavior. That on itself is a pretty, good lineup for a perfect storm. We've also got things like the elections coming up shortly, and we've seen with the things to do with Ukraine war and things to do with Israel that the platform is really not built in a way now, or certainly not able to sustain any sense of safety on the platform. And I think they're heavily relying on the community notes feature, which, although I think is one of the few bright spots on the platform this year, it certainly isn't up to matching the demands of what what's going on right now. But in short, the platform is more toxic, less, for me certainly, and I think for a lot of people, less engaging and less useful. And some of the its core function for a lot of people was news. And the thing that he seemingly wanted to do is to destroy that relationship with news partnerships with journalists and make it less of a platform that's can serve the purpose of keeping people informed. So any way you look at it, he seems to have got a hammer and smashed all of the kind of key bits of the platform that were valuable, including the brand.
And it's worth just saying, oh, sorry.
No,
I was just going to add that, as Matt said, community notes is one of the things that he's touted again and again as a high point after the acquisition, something that he's really invested in. That existed before it was called Birdwatch. And I think if you talk to former engineers, people who are still at the company but were there pre-Elon, they'll say a lot of the things that he's bragging about, oh, look how more efficient we are, look how many features we've rushed out, they existed in some form before, and some of them were shelved because Twitter was hopelessly bureaucratic, and it's good that they got out the door. And other things were shelved because there were real security risks of them being rushed out. And when we've seen things like encrypted DMs launching without, an ideal kind of security protocol and assessment, I think there's questions about whether the efficiency, the speed was worth it.
I mean, I guess that's the number one defense, isn't it, of Elon, is that compared to the previous management, which seemed to take a year just to roll out the most basic upgrades. I remember when they went from, I think, 140 characters to 200 or so. And you'd think they'd put a man on the moon there, where they were talking about how difficult that was to implement. And for all of his faults, and Matt did a fantastic job there of kind of describing how many of these things have backfired, he has achieved he's made a leaner Twitter. He's made one that can actually roll out new features. If you were someone looking for optimism in this, and maybe you were one of the banks hoping that your loan to Elon comes good, is that what you focus on, Zoe? Is that what you're looking at as the way out of this?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that Twitter is more efficient today than it was during previous eras of the company. I think almost anyone who worked there, even people who really don't like what he's done to Twitter, would say that it had real problems before. There were just even small projects had to get buy-in from people at all levels of the company. There were rounds after rounds of meetings. There was so much red tape. And that really was an issue and something that most people wanted to change even before he came on the scene. And so I think, yes, we can't mention the many things that have gone wrong without also saying that, yes, it is leaner, it is more efficient than it was previously.
But Matt, in your capacity as a consultant, you of course talk to companies that are thinking about their presence on Twitter and other social networks. When they see these changes, do they see a safe space? Do they see something exciting, or what are they seeing?
No, the clients that I've dealt with this year, particularly very large, very global super brands that I've spoken to, have said to me quite clearly, we are actively finding ways to kind of extract ourselves from the platform, or at least having a plan of action for when that day comes, which we think will come soon for us as a company. And there's several big brands that have told me that. And so I think that seems to be the sort of way most are approaching it. It's kind of watchful waiting with a reduced kind of investment in it anyway. But I think there's, someone said earlier in the year, that for most companies, or for a lot of companies around the world that do use Twitter for advertising, the amount they spend as a total of their spend is a rounding error. For some companies, it's a small amount, and so it's actually fairly easy for many companies to shift that spend, because it's not a substantial amount of their total ad budget. But we've seen, as the numbers that I think in various different articles in the last few weeks, and particularly in the last few days, numbers of 50-60% down in terms of ad revenue, and the number of brands and massively has dropped and continues to fall. And the only thing they seem to have offered is to kind of mitigate that, in terms of Linda Yaccarino, is kind of some, what I would say, a fairly basic minimum standard safety kind of keyword prevention tools, and a few other implementations. But all of this becomes irrelevant, because at the center of the storm is Elon Musk. And it doesn't matter how many brand safety features you add, it doesn't matter how much good now maybe the company could do in terms of turning around, in terms of the features that they put out that might be really good features, or some of the policy changes it could change and make things better again. It comes back to the fact that people do not separate X and Twitter from Elon Musk. He is the biggest, most followed character on the platform. He likes being the main character on the platform. What he says, whether it's to do with the company or not, is a reflection of what that brand stands for. And advertisers know that in the past, calling people pedophiles and doxing people have led them to flee their homes, and all sorts of other kind of behaviors in terms of Elon Musk, is highly damaging. And that's, for me, why I think that Linda Yaccarino, it's not a case of if she goes, it's a case of when, because I don't think it's tenable or realistic to expect that she'll either stay there and it'll all be okay, and that she won't be fired by Elon Musk when he gets bored of her, or doesn't like something she's done or said, or they disagree, or she realizes she just can't keep herself reputationally alongside him as he walks the path that he's taken. So,
Zoe, what's your assessment of what Matt said there about Linda Yaccarino? I mean, she had that disastrous interview recently, but how do people feel about her within the company, do you think?
I mean, I think it's hard to get to know her. I'm sure this is not true for everyone. The people I speak to have said that she seems very corporate, very buttoned up, a friendly face. She's polite, she's nice, she seems interested in the business and getting to know people. But I don't think many people feel like they have a good sense of her being able to truly stand up to Elon Musk.
In your role at the platform, I mean, like I was saying at the beginning, the newsletter is all about different platforms, where users are going, what they're doing. How do you think of Twitter now? Like, are you starting to turn your attention to perhaps competitors more so than X? I mean, what's your feeling as we look into this sort of next 12 months under Elon, of where your attentions are going to lie in reporting and just thinking about this network generally?
Yeah, I mean, we will still continue to track Twitter and Elon Musk. He is one of the most important people and the most powerful people in the world. Twitter, we're still interested to see where the story goes and kind of where it ends up. That said, I think it's fair to say that it's becoming more of a right-wing social network, and it is a very different platform than the one that we once knew. I think its cultural relevance, particularly to the mainstream press, has declined very significantly. Casey and I, my co-writer, were interested in Threads. I think, there was this moment right after Threads launched in July where it felt like it had good traction. Usage really declined after that. It struggled to retain users, but it has felt like people are still casting around for alternatives. And I think this vision of a decentralized social network like Threads has promised it would be, does really have potential. Rather than looking for one social network to solve all of our problems, perhaps we have a few different ones that work together and we carry our social graph with us wherever we go, which would be a very different way of operating on the internet than we have previously.
So it feels like, and this is something that I think is fascinating to think about. We talk about what the next Twitter is going to be. It sounds like Twitter might actually be a kind of stuck in time idea now. The idea, like you say, of one central place that's this kind of water cooler of the internet isn't really going to be what the future model is. It's going to be spread around in lots of different places. do you think that becomes a mainstream thing? You hear lots of complaints about Mastodon being complicated. I disagree. I think it's perfectly fine, but it's certainly less straightforward than just signing up to one website. This is what people are used to. So how do you think that evolves over time with users?
I still think we're right at the beginning of this shift. It's an old idea that has failed to gain traction in the mainstream because it is a little more cumbersome and complicated, and it's hard to think about. That said, I think ultimately it does serve users better. I mean, I think a lot of us have the firsthand experience of growing very big platforms on Twitter and now having to leave that behind if the platform isn't serving us professionally in the way that it once was. And so the idea that we would own our content, we would own our followers, and we'd be able to take them from place to place, that news organizations would be able to build news apps that would work with the social network. So we wouldn't be asking Meta to solve all of our problems for the business model of the news industry. I think that really is a bright future, but we're way too early to say whether that will stay kind of a fringe theoretical idea or whether that will become the future of social media. And it's also worth saying that, I think for me, Twitter doesn't feel like a platform of the future. And I know that there are many people who are fans of Elon Musk who disagree with that assessment, but I do think the idea of decentralization seems fundamentally at odds with the way that he likes to run his companies, which is to have end-to-end control, to build the machine that makes the machine. It's like I don't think is embracing this new concept. And we're still at a moment where we're seeing, well, is Mark Zuckerberg's embrace of this kind of decentralized world, is that the vision of the future? Or are we going to eventually just go back to this old mode that Elon Musk is hanging on to?
It's a completely diametrically opposed, isn't it? On the one hand, you've got the proponents of owning your identity and putting it in various places. But Musk's vision of this is that not only is there one social network that people are in, but also it's your bank, it's your it's your entertainment, it's where you're getting your job. I mean, obviously the model here is China. Matt, I'm curious as to know whether you think there's anything about that model and I think US and UK users are similar in this regard. Like, do you think there's any desire among people in our economy to have that kind of app in their life?
In a word, no, not really.
I think fair enough. Thanks, everyone.
I think the point being that we've seen it before, like, Meta and Facebook and Instagram for many years has been quite bloated as an app anyway, and it's had features like weather and birthdays and shopping features, and goodness knows if you sit there and list them, there's loads of different things it could do for you, and most of them people never use, and it becomes quite cumbersome, and they have to kind of then do an exercise of stripping it back.
Didn't they try dating for a while? I remember Mark Zuckerberg announcing dating. Did anyone ever get a date on Facebook dating? I don't think so.
Well, exactly. And I think that we were talking earlier on, or I was certainly saying about this issue of trust as well, and kind of Elon Musk being at the center of all of this stuff, and to be able to be confident and okay with giving a company maybe your banking details or your health records or any other integrations with your data to be able to serve you in a all-encompassing way. You have to trust the company, and you have to trust the people at the top of the company. And I don't think there's any of that going on anymore. And I don't know if that will ever change, because the narrative has been written and he keeps on riding it in terms of, almost playing up to the, this kind of villain role that he likes to play. And it doesn't help serve this idea that he wants to create the everything app. And on top of that, it's not like all the other companies in the US and Europe are just going to roll over and kind of not try and compete. So he's going to face stiff competition by all sorts of people in like payment systems and in retail and shopping and whatever features he adds. And then on top of that, the China kind of model that everyone refers to, like WeChat, that was born out of a very distinct period of time, and in terms of why it grew to be popular in the way it was, and also the kind of the way people use social media in that part of the world, and the integrations with all of these different kind of platforms and services and government services is so vastly different, and has taken years to develop. The idea that he can suddenly convince people that he's a good guy, that you can trust him and the company, that everyone will give him the data freely, and people would want that, I think is farcical. I think it's pie in the sky. I don't see it at all. I think if recent months are to go by in terms of product development and features X, in terms of what exciting things they can do, then it's pretty depressing to think what the next 12 months will be like, because audio and video calls, I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd ever want to have an audio video call from people on Twitter. I love people that follow me, and that's great. But in terms of the safety of the platform and the reliability of it and the way that most people use Twitter, I just don't see it. And yeah, I'm very, very skeptical.
Matt,
Building
we
off
met.
of, oh,
I was going to say, me and Matt met on Twitter. I'm trying not to be offended, but maybe.
you guys can video call.
Doesn't want a
Everyone
video
else can
call.
know, but...
Fair enough.
But going off
sorry,
of
sorry,
well, just the WeChat example that Matt was talking about, it was really interesting yesterday because one of the earliest all hands meetings that Elon Musk had with Twitter staff, I believe an employee asked, like he was mentioning the super app idea. We want Twitter to be a super app. And someone mentioned the things that Matt was pointing out about why WeChat works in China, but that would be very hard to recreate in the United States. And Elon Musk's response, if I remember correctly, was something like, I'm not actually, that WeChat was just an example. We're not going to actually build that. That would be ridiculous. Now, take yesterday, he said actually almost the exact opposite. He said we should be thinking of WeChat. We should be building WeChat. We can do that here. I'd be very surprised if in a year we don't have a robust banking platform.
It's interesting because one of the arguments I've seen around why Elon, because there's this disconnect, isn't there, between here's the guy who didn't found Tesla, but is today, and he's putting reusable rockets into space, and yet this social network has become a complete disaster, and people are finding that hard to sort of work out why it is that the same guy is doing that. And one of the arguments I heard was that in those other businesses, Elon can have these massive ideas, but essentially what he meets at some point are the laws of physics. And when it comes to software development, you can essentially say we're going to do whatever we like because we can just code it and we can make these services and people are going to use them. And it's much harder to rein in the bad ideas. And it doesn't seem like to me, and sorry, I'm interested to get your thought on it. Like, it doesn't seem like Elon's got enough people around him that he's listening to fully. And so when he suddenly says, I'm going to put a big X on the roof, the answer from his staff is, okay, how big, right? So is that the status quo at Twitter as far as you can tell from the people that you talk to at the company?
Absolutely. This is something that even people who really do like him and like working with him will say, is that he doesn't have people around him who will tell him the truth. It's a very sycophantic group. People are very nervous, and he makes it that way because he's brutal when he doesn't like the response that he gets from someone. I think that ultimately something that he failed to grasp and continues to fail to grasp is that Twitter was and continues to be, unfortunately, an advertising platform. And because of that, the product that it is selling in some ways is content moderation. And when you do not understand that content moderation is a product that you can sell, you're fundamentally never going to grasp the business in a way that will be able to serve advertisers and then users.
Yeah, it's funny. I have it. So this, not to look like I've done some homework, but this is the employment. This is the employees count at Twitter, and you can see quite clearly where Musk has come along. And one of the big impacts of that, as you were just saying, in content moderation and making sure the platform's safe. Matt, the concern around that among companies and brands must be enormous. I mean, is that one of the main things you're hearing, presumably?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think companies are concerned about having their brand associated with content around it that is toxic and is dangerous, or is something that you just wouldn't want to place Disney next to. They're worried about that. I think they're nervous and worried about kind of what Elon Musk will do next and say next week, and that they're somehow complicit in that or part of that by still spending money on the platform. But I also think the results it drives and delivers is there's question marks of that. Most of the stats that we get, unfortunately, we have to rely on third party because the numbers that we get from Linda Yaccarino and Elon often differ greatly to that of the rest of the world and the sources that we look at. But by most accounts, by most measures of other people, it seems like the platform is continuing to spiral and to deteriorate. So I think there's a question as to actually what value are they getting? What's the benefit to them? And I think if you kind of put things on a balance of kind of like the return on the investment and the benefits of being on the platform versus the risks, the dangers, the hassle of it, when they could be spending time and money elsewhere, that balance has massively swung fairly quickly, and I think possibly permanently for many brands on the side of, I think we should step back, and that's what we're seeing. I find it very infuriating and really kind of surprising that Linda can come out and say some of the things that she's saying about the health of the platform and the relationships, the positive conversations with brands, when every other metric and every other person that's seeing this and is in the industry is saying something opposite. It must be difficult getting out of bed in the morning and having to kind of say the same lines and kind of push that story.
I mean, just on those metrics, Zoe, I mean, obviously when Twitter was a public company, it had the SEC to answer to with some of the measures of how its business was performing. I mean, as a reporter in this, how do you look at things like, what was it, user seconds, so as way as measuring popularity, user seconds, unregretted minutes? I mean, how do you even begin to unpick the sort of fact from fiction when it comes to what Twitter says about itself?
Yeah, I mean, this is a moving target for sure, because like you alluded to, they kind of continued to make new metrics to measure themselves by, things we've never really heard of. But honestly, even then, what we were seeing internally is that they tended to take slices of data that showed the platform was performing positively, and employees would show me and show Casey that if you just widen the aperture a little bit, you would see that it was like this again and again. It was like kind of on the decline overall, but then a little event would like spike it. And it's not clear to us whether Elon Musk was sharing those figures, and now Linda Yaccarino, because that's what employees were showing him, or whether he knows the whole picture and is choosing to just try and paint more optimism than what's really going on.
There's many parallels with Trump when it comes to how Elon Musk behaves, but also that, it's not clear who's got his ear and who's telling him everything is going great. And I think looking at the replies to his posts, it would be easy to see how he could exist in this alternate universe, because all of his posts are going, great job, great job, great job. And
yeah,
that's not normal.
I mean, I think the Ron DeSantis Twitter space is one of the clearest examples of that. If you read the coverage of that event, if you listened to the event, you were like, this seems like a disaster. It was maybe 300,000 people listening in at the peak. There were so many technical glitches. Elon Musk started a room, then it had to switch to David Sachs. And yet, if you look at what he was tweeting, what the Ron DeSantis' campaign was sharing after the fact, it seemed like a roaring success. And again, it's not clear whether they actually believe that, whether they're just spinning the facts. But really, it does feel like we're living in two alternate universes.
So our social team was mocking my paper graph earlier, so I'm going to do another one just to emphasize the point. But it relates to this. This is a graph. This is from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. This is the percentage growth of users in October 2023 compared to the same period last year, and obviously that's pretty stark. You can see that Twitter is way down. Is that upside down? Oh, there we go. So, now the question is, I mean, how does that line change? I mean, is it politics? I mean, we're about to come into an election year here in the US. That fills me with dread, well, for many reasons, but particularly because of what social media might mean. Is that a route to improving these numbers, Matt? Do you think?
I'm sure that they will get a bump in terms of engagement and activity, because Twitter and platforms like it, explode with opinion and vitriol around things to do with elections and characters like Donald Trump and anyone else. So undoubtedly they will get a bump, which may well be zoomed in on a graph to make it look like a massive mountain of growth. I think it will also come with a huge peak in misinformation and toxic content and all the other stuff that we see that comes with politics and election periods as well. I don't think that the community notes feature is going to stand up to it particularly well. It's sort of at times address some of the problems with misinformation, but there's still masses of problems with it, and it doesn't do anywhere near enough of a good job to handle the entire safety of the platform that a team of content moderators and better policies and a more robust platform could deliver, and sort of was better at it, even maybe just a little bit before Elon Musk took charge. So yeah, I think that will happen. I think in general, what we'll probably see, my hunch is what we've already started to see, where that the platform will kind of, the decline of it in terms of usage and growth will kind of be more flatline over a certain period of time, maybe next year. And it will just be that the mix of people, the sorts of people that use Twitter will change, and it already has and already is, and the sorts of content and the sorts of things that people engage in will change. And I think that the mainstream, the kind of the central core of users that came there for news and entertainment and other things that they use Twitter for, will feel that it's particularly unpleasant and unbearable and shift elsewhere or use it less, but it will be backfilled by the sorts of people that are used to going to platforms like Rumble or any of the alternative platforms where it's kind of embraced this kind of the extreme. So I think we'll see lots more of the people on the most extreme left and the extreme right, and there'll be freedom of speech in there, and it will all be stirred up, and at the center of it all would be King Elon, leading the charge. So I think it's going to be an absolute mess.
I mean, it's an optimistic take, Matt. I'll give you that. Sorry, I mean, just we'll end here. I mean, how do you see the next year panning out? I mean, not just for X, but in the social media landscape generally, particularly as we think about this election coming up.
Yeah, I mean, already the platform is trying to sell the idea that it's popular among politicians to advertisers. They've been sending,
which is true, right? That's true.
That's still true. And I think we, like Matt said, like, it's not like there's not a market for a right-wing social network if that's the route it wants to go. I think when Parler shut down earlier this year, it said like there's no longer a need for us to exist. And in my mind, I was like, yeah, because Twitter has kind of become that in some ways. That said, the business model, I think, is still very shaky. A right-wing social network, one thing that it would be very difficult to do would be rely on advertisers, because inherently you're going to need fewer content moderation policies. And that's something, like Matt has pointed to very eloquently, like brands don't like. And, when we think of something like Twitter Blue that was supposed to roll out, now called X Premium, and kind of fill the gap, I think that was a fundamental misreading of the user base. Most people on Twitter are lurkers, and this was a product that was created for creators. That's a very small percentage of the user base, and it was a complete flop by the numbers. So in the next year, I don't know. I mean, I'm having fun on Threads personally. It does feel like it kind of has some of the magic that I personally hadn't found on Blue Sky or Mastodon or some of the other platforms. Do I think that we should now, go from trying to have Elon Musk solve some of our problems to having Mark Zuckerberg solve some of our problems? Like, I don't know if that's really ultimately the answer, but I think if we can hold Meta to its promise of federation, of decentralization, then there is the potential to kind of move to a better, brighter future where ultimately we as the user have more control. But I think right now, we're still waiting to see how that decline that Matt pointed to is going to go, how swift it will be, and then what will really come in its place. And I think at this point, if Threads really does break through, or if it can't get people to stick around, it doesn't lean into news, it continues to resist, and ultimately Meta shutters it like it has so many other apps, that's a real possibility.
Big unknowns going into next year. I don't know about you guys, I'm mostly on Threads now. So that seems to be at least where I'm putting my flag. We need to wrap it up. You can see all of Bloomberg's opinion pieces at bloomberg.com/opinion. You can see Zoe's